Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack a classic, incredibly high-stakes scenario of survival, resource management, and analytical problem solving. We are looking at the timeless account of the Thristy Crow. Now, you might be familiar with the basic premise of this story, but today, we're going to completely break down the mechanics of this event. We're going to look at the literal data behind the story and extract the methodology behind one of nature's most famous displays of sheer grit.
But before we get into the exact timeline, I want you to really put yourself in this scenario for a second. Imagine the absolute severe frustration of facing a critical, non-negotiable biological need like acute dehydration with a solution that is agonizingly close but physically inaccessible. It's a terrifying paradox, right? The resource is literally right there, your body is shutting down without it, and yet an invisible or physical barrier is standing right in your way. So how do you respond? Do you succumb to panic, or do you innovate? Because that is the exact crucible our subject is forced into today.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the summer drought, and set the stage for this environmental crisis. A hot summer day. I mean, it sounds simple enough, but the implications here are actually massive. For a biological organism, extreme heat accelerates water loss exponentially. This environment is completely hostile. The stakes here are literally life and death. You see, the crow isn't just looking for a casual midday refreshment, it's operating under a severe ticking clock of dehydration. Every single movement costs precious energy, and that hot summer sun is actively depleting the crow's reserves minute by minute. Let's trace how this crisis actually unfolds. We start with the initial state. The subject is very thirsty, and this leads directly into a prolonged, exhausting search, flying here and there. Now think about the caloric and hydration cost of flight for a second. Flying here and there in a hot summer drought is a massive gamble. The crow is burning its final resources just hoping for a return on investment. The desperation builds and builds until, finally, after some time, which tells us right off the bat this was not an easy search, the subject spots a potential resource, a pot under a tree. Boom, hope is restored. The target is acquired. Moving on to Section 2, an unreachable resource. Let's look at this physical barrier. Okay, looking here, we've got a stark, almost cruel visual conflict. On side A, we have the biological tool available, the crow's beak. Evolution has designed this tool for a lot of great things, but it definitely wasn't designed for deep vertical extraction. Then, on side B, we have the environmental reality, just a little water sitting at the very bottom of a deep pot. This is that tragedy of proximity I mentioned earlier. The crow flies to the pot, looks inside, and realizes its physical apparatus simply cannot bridge the gap to the water. The resource is completely locked away by geometry.
Which brings us to Section 3, the ideation phase, or as I like to call it, the methodology of willpower.
Now, this right here, this is the absolute make-or-break moment. Most creatures, when faced with this kind of geometric impossibility, would expend a ton of useless energy just trying to force their beak further in. Or, they'd simply give up and accept defeat. But our subject transitions from desperation to pure intellect. The crow thought for a while. Guys, this is a masterclass in problem solving. The crow takes a critical pause. It completely stops the panic response. It assesses the environment. It realizes that if the internal tool, the beak, cannot change, then the external environment must be manipulated to change the state of the water. This pause is exactly where ingenuity is born. The crow looks around, spots some nearby small stones, and synthesizes a completely new strategy. Let's look at Section 4, step-by-step execution, where we see literal physics in action. Let's break down exactly how the crow pulls this off. Step 1, identifying the secondary resource, the stones. But steps 2 and 3 are where the real grit shines, picking them up and dropping them in, one by one. I want you to really focus on that phrase for a second, one by one. This isn't some quick magic trick. This is a grueling, highly repetitive, energy-intensive process. The crow is already exhausted, already terribly dehydrated, yet it commits to a labor-intensive operation based entirely on the trust that its hypothesis, water displacement, will eventually work. It requires an absolutely incredible amount of delayed gratification. And as you can see mapped out here, this perfectly illustrates Archimedes' principle of displacement in action. Slowly, and I mean agonizingly slowly, as the volume of stones in the pot increases, the water is forced upward. It's a straight, linear progression of success. Now, those first few stones, it didn't quench the crow's thirst. It had to keep going, trusting the process, until that water level finally reached the near top threshold. And finally, we get to the successful conclusion of the whole operation. The water breaches the necessary threshold, coming right up near the top. The crow finally gets to drink, fully restoring its biological functions, and then just flies away, having completely conquered the environmental crisis. The return on investment for all that exhaustive one-by-one labor is absolute survival.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Willpower and the Way, our ultimate takeaway.
So you've definitely heard this foundational moral before. Where there is a will, there is a way. But after actually analyzing the hard data of this event, this quote takes on a much deeper, much more practical meaning, doesn't it? The will isn't just some vague, fuzzy feeling of wanting something really badly. The will is that critical pause to actually think. The will is the analytical observation of the stones. The will is the relentless, exhausting, one-by-one execution of a plan when you are already dead tired. The way wasn't just magically provided to the crow. The crow actively engineered the way through applied methodology. Which brings us to our final question for you today. The geometry of your problems might look a little different than a beak in a clay pot, but the mechanics of the solution, they're exactly the same. When you encounter a barrier that blocks your goal, do you just stare at it in panic? Or do you take that critical pause, look for the stones in your immediate environment, and start doing the heavy lifting, one by one? How will you apply this stone-by-stone ingenuity to the seemingly unreachable goals in your own life? Take a look around. Your stones are out there, just waiting to be picked up.